Hello again, Mark White, Dennis Fernandez, White Summers, sitting in the offices of Whitespace. Continuing our deep dive into your background, Dennis, and I think a fascinating part of your story is the business that you created for many years and created your own wealth as an innovator yourself. And so you've practiced what you've preached. We've had a couple of videos on what companies ought to do to create enabling technology, looking at the future, conversion points and all that, and you actually did that. So you had an innovation company. You had a team of people that helped you conceive, create innovation, different industry sectors, and then file patents, and then you prosecuted those. And I'd like to talk about that as a business and just give us some history of the business and intellectual ventures in Washington, D.C. is an example of a company, big company that does this, Rambus as well. But the world's changed as well. The patent world has changed. So that's sort of the second part of our discussion. But let's talk about the way things were with the innovation that you created in your innovation company. So talk to me about that business and how it was put together.
Well, this project started in the mid-90s, at a time when enforcing patents was more lucrative, although I think it's coming back now in a surprising way with university licensing. The early efforts were exploring how to secure via patents emerging business models. It wasn't clear to me at the time, because I came in not just as an electrical engineer and a lawyer, but as a venture capitalist, that people, inventors and companies and their investors were deliberately creating patents that read on emerging business models. Okay, and I thought that approach was very different. Okay, it wasn't just a technical solution that invented some new gadget, but it was really defining new platforms that might be standard business models. Okay, and I wasn't sure if that was doable, but we tried. We had a small team in Silicon Valley, and we tried different industries, GPS, automotive, a lot of biomedical stuff.
And you did this in the late 1990s.
Yes, yeah,
and
early 2000s.
And so really, you're talking about a gestation period of 10 years before any of these technologies turned into any market creation, really. I mean, autonomous driving, auto technology, connectivity, IoT, all these industries are new, but you were thinking about it back in the mid to late 1990s, or you had to.
Yes.
Okay. And the lesson is that company innovators have to do the same thing in whatever they do as well, in a sense, right?
Yes. Unless you are that early, you basically about 8 to 10 years early. You're going to miss the window to pioneer this stuff, because it's just a matter of time before people start to do things. It's a very incremental process, very glacial, but you can see far enough out that there's a chance that these things will. Although I have to say, when you're the first guy doing this stuff in the beginning, it's not so easy or obvious. There's nothing compelling about it in the beginning. You're basically inventing in a vacuum. You kind of connect the dots from some of the literature, but there's not much guidance at that time.
And it's interesting because your visibility on what is of value in an industry, a sector, sort of a product solutions initiative becomes clearer as you get closer to the market. You see what everybody else is doing, but more importantly, you visualize customer needs. So you truly are inventing in a vacuum. And there's lots of business press out there about creating a monopoly in your market. And the hard thing is you got to create a monopoly before the market is even conceived, right? So you've got this real problem on how to build for something that hasn't been created yet. But there's other innovation as well, creating a standard, such as a business model, business methodology. That's what Google did. It sort of created its monopoly just on the business model and design on how they built their product and grabbed information and categorized it and then how they charge for it. So there's different ways to innovate, really, and create a standard. But you're talking about IP. Okay, so you did this, and then you basically had to try to partner, as Rambus and Intellectual Ventures has done, with users of this technology. And the game back in the early 2000s, late 2000s, was to sue people, and that's what you had to do. Okay, so then you were in court a lot, did pretty darn well. So what did you learn from kind of doing that? Because there's lots of intellectual property litigation, and large companies, even emerging growth companies, are embroiled in litigation. And are there some takeaways that you learned from that on how companies should build and protect their products? Something you got from the litigation side of what you've done, which is important to know.
Well, it's hard to litigate. It takes years, and you have to have backup positions via multiple patents.
Well, let me ask it this way. You were a plaintiff in many of these suits. So the defense, what were the most effective defenses that defendants used to protect themselves in these types of situations, which could actually help earlier stage companies in how they design products?
Yeah. Well, the normal process for defendants is to delay escalation. So it's not easy to open up communications or to get any kind of meaningful negotiation in the beginning. So that can drag on for many months, sometimes years. You have to be prepared to modify your patent position strategically. This I like to do because that's our core competence. But most companies don't do that, Mark.
So you're saying that you would innovate and then you would change, as you got more visibility on the markets, you would change and modify your own innovation.
Yes, so there are some procedural opportunities to strengthen your patent position. And these can be real significant game changers. Most startups don't think about that because it's expensive to continue to prosecute or go through re-examination or file all kinds of reinforcing documents. So one of the most important takeaways I learned because I've done a bunch of these cases now, is I never underestimate how aggressively the defendant's counsel will use the tools available to them to try and invalidate your position, or not so much arguing on infringement, although they'll do that, but it's all about trying to break the patents, and that's a serious threat.
So just on that one point, companies, emerging growth, mezzanine stage, even large public companies, file patents to protect themselves under the belief that patents are creating a monopoly interest for a given period of time and that they're unassailable. How would you break a patent?
Well, the typical behavior now is via re-examination. So it's a more efficient, low-cost procedure with the Patent Office to challenge existing U.S. patents.
And the core argument there is prior art, public domain, and so the lesson to be learned is when you innovate and try to protect that with patents, prior art search is pretty important, right? So looking backwards in time, as well as the visionary stuff we talked about, trying to figure out what you're going to have to invent, but You're looking backwards as well.
Yeah, I guess one lesson I learned is I changed my mind completely on going for broad claims. I think now you actually want very narrow claims that will survive this kind of challenge for validity, so long as they're still assertable against infringing activity.
So let's talk about that. So is the trick to have a lot of claims very narrow, or I guess it is, or just a few claims very narrow and you have iterations of the technology? I mean, we talked earlier in one of our videos about having sort of an enabling technology and a patent covering all this stuff, and then you put layers on top as you innovate and you evolve your product over time. Okay, that makes sense from a product development perspective, and sort of side by side with what you're protecting with a patent process. But in terms of protecting yourself in court, you're talking about narrow claims, right, that are unassailable. And so how does that relate to our process of a core enabling technology and iterations of new patents on top?
Well, usually the basic concept is quite elegant,
Okay.
but it's easier to invalidate, because often it's a very simple concept. And so you need to have a lot of little poison darts that are based on that concept. So different implementations that use that idea. And you just send them all in there and hope not only the examiner approves them, but they actually read on licensable activities, so you have a robust licensing portfolio.
So let me ask one more question in this segment, which is companies that we're working with that are being attacked by other competitors. Either they're in court or they're not, and they got a cease and desist letter alleging infringement. And so you're protecting yourself, you're on the defendant side of the table. Would the best strategy be, I mean, there's probably lots of strategies and tactics, but one sort of key way to approach this is to basically attack the other side by attacking their patents prior to going to court. So it's basically looking into their own innovation, their own patents, their own history. What was the world like when they filed, and prior art at that time? And so really, that's something you can do if you're in this type of a situation.
I suppose it's really a search for the truth, Mark. So you want to know, is this patent sustainable? You know, does it really define a novel concept that should be patented, and therefore you respect that property right? Or is it a mistake by the patent office because they missed some prior art that would render it obvious? And I think the potential defendants want to know, their management wants to know, is this a challengeable position? Or I think the correct approach, and I'm not telling people any value structure here on property rights, but if it's a real trespass to exclusive position, maybe you should pay your rent or stop making the infringing product. I'm afraid some of the larger defendants will impose their resource on the little guys, like in Silicon Valley, some universities or inventors, and wear them down, even if it's clear that there's a bona fide patent position. So there's an interesting policy debate on this. I understand that it's not nice to misuse patents if people are not on solid ground, if the patents are questionable to begin with. But I don't think they're all like that. I think there's a maturation in the industry where the computer and software industries hopefully now starting to have a different respect for property rights like they do in healthcare and biomedical, where they do take these things seriously.
So in our next segment, I'd like to talk a bit about the new patent law, things that have changed, and how that impacts companies today, and the dynamics of how companies compete today as well. Thank you all for being part of our discussion. We'll talk to you next time.